Hello everyone, my name is Protesilaos, also known as Prot. In this video I will talk to you about my new completion framework for Emacs. This is a system that consists of standalone packages of modules that I have pieced together into an emergent system. And what I want to do in this video is talk to you about those individual components and how they fit together into the broader picture. So the idea is that I will be talking to you about those packages, but also demonstrating some of their main features, some of their main points of entry. I will not be exhaustive in this demo, so I will not cover everything that each of those packages does, because then I will be sitting here for at least a couple of hours, and I prefer to be a bit more succinct. So what I have here is an org mode buffer, standard org mode, and I have prepared the presentation for you. So let me toggle my presentation mode on, and let's start with our video today. So first, an overview of what constitutes my system, what are the constituents of my system. First and foremost, is the default mini buffer. And what I mean by the default mini buffer is the real default, so not I-complete, not IDO, nothing of the sort, just the standard mini buffer that you get when you run Emacs without any configurations, so Emacs capital Q on the command line. This is the standard mini buffer, no customizations whatsoever. This is the real thing. So it's the default mini buffer, and then I have the orderless package. This is a completion style that is meant to be added to the list of built-in completion styles. So there are several of them already built into Emacs, and then you can just add orderless to that list as well. And I will explain why you may want to do so, what is the value proposition of orderless. Then we have Embark, which is in abstract a tool that allows you to perform actions on targets, and we will explain what constitutes an action, a possible action, and what is a target, and how there can be actions for individual items and then actions for sets thereof. So we will explain this further into the presentation. Then we have Consult, which is a set of utilities that either extend built-in mini-buffer-centric commands or provide new ones in the same spirit. So we will see what this means in practice as well. And finally, we have Marginalia, which is a tool that adds metadata, meta information to completion candidates, and it does so by reading the completion table that is currently being read. So again, we will see this in action, so don't worry if I am a bit too abstract right now. I will elaborate so that I don't remain generic as I am at the moment. So the idea with these tools is that they are independent of each other. They are really modular. So you don't have to use them as a set. You can pick and choose, mix and match however you feel like. For example, you may not want the default mini buffer. You may prefer something like select room or I-complete. Maybe you don't want orderless. You want to use just the built-in styles, or maybe something like prescient. Perhaps you want Consult but not Embark, or vice versa. Maybe you don't want Marginalia, maybe you want something else, maybe there is another package. You get the idea. The point is that even though those are independent of each other, they have a standalone presence, they can work together, they can operate in tandem, and by operating together, they can deliver a system that is rather robust and quite effective. We will see this in action. So let's start with orderless and the built-in partial completion, because those are the two styles that I configure for my system, and this has been the case ever since orderless entered the fray several months ago. So what is orderless? I think it is better to demonstrate by means of an example. Of course, you can infer its utility by its name. So it is about matching items out of order. So for example, if I type name buffer, let's see what we get over here. You can see that we get, I have flexible matching, but for our purposes now, let's make everything literal strings. So you can see that even though I typed name and buffer, don't worry about the equal sign, I will explain this in a second. Even though I typed name followed by buffer, you can see that I also get buffer name and rename buffer. So you can see that the order does not matter. What matters is that those groups are being matched, and then you get the results back to you. So that is very effective and very efficient in practice. Now, as you can see over here, I have two groups and they are colored differently over there. The beauty of orderless is that each group can have its own pattern matching style. There are, of course, ways to configure a default set of styles, so flexible, matching, irregular expressions, initialisms, literal string, and some variations of those. You can refer to the orderless documentation for the relevant details. But the idea is that building on top of those styles is the notion of style dispatchers. And what those are single characters that you append to a group. And in doing so, you assign a style, a pre-configured style, to that group. So in my case over here, you have seen already that I appended the equals sign to those two groups. And what the equals sign means for my case, because I have configured it, is to treat the preceding group, so the group before the style dispatcher, before the equals sign, to treat it as a literal string. Of course, you can configure every character to mean whatever style you want, but usually I only want to have this one over here. So this style dispatcher can come in very handy. And then we can have, for example, I don't know, let's have something, nothing starts with W. Let's have it like this. Of course, you can see I typed a regular expression and a literal string, and I got something like that. If I do it like this, so you get the idea. You can have a regular expression and something that has a style dispatcher associated with it, and you will still get the results that match those patterns. In practice, orderless is very powerful, and it is what I use practically all the time. With one exception, there is one use case where I employ the built-in partial completion style, and this is when it comes to the matter of completing file names, because the find file command, so Ctrl+X, Ctrl+F, and relevant commands have this concept of dynamic completion, so the list of candidates gets updated when you change directories. Let's see it in practice so that I don't remain generic and abstract the whole time. So you can see you are in this directory over here and you get some results, and then when you go to another directory you get some more results. So this is dynamic completion. Now, the idea with the partial completion style is that you can pass an abbreviated file system path, and this will expand into whatever absolute path matches that abbreviation. So let's see this in action. I have an example written here, and this is very helpful. So you can see that I am typing the tilde /.lsf, and then I hit tab, and you can see that I am expanding into local share fonts into this path over here, and this is of course a directory editor buffer, a dired buffer. You can of course visit dired buffers with a find file, so it's not literally about files. And of course in Unix, a file and a directory are technically the same, but okay, whatever. And now let's go back to our file over here. I will just use some orderless again, though I could have gotten there faster because it was the default item, but you get the idea over here. Those two styles cover the totality of my needs. As I said, I have been using orderless for a very long time now, ever since it was introduced to the public. I think that was in around spring of last year. Anyhow, let's proceed and let's now talk about Embark. Embark can be a bit difficult to grasp at first, because even though it rests on a simple premise, it is a rather simple concept, its actual implementation, its actual application can be quite broad and far-reaching. So, of course, you may not quite understand how Embark may fit into your workflow. So, in general, Embark is a tool that allows you to carry out actions on targets. What constitutes a target is contingent on the case. It depends on the context. And actions associated with the target are also configured accordingly to match the context. Let me show you some examples in practice, and you will see it how this works. A very broad generalization that you can make is that Embark is more or less like a contextual menu, the kind of stuff you get when you hit right click on your mouse. But it can be much more than that, because this is Emacs, of course. So what you do with your contextual menu is really up to you. But let's see this in practice. Your main point of entry, your conduit to Embark, to this contextuality that Embark provides, is the Embark Act command that you should definitely bind to a convenient key. I bind it to Control and comma, but there is nothing special about this. Use whatever makes sense for you. So let's see it in action over here. I want to, you see my point is over this symbol, and I want to hit Embark Act, and with the help of the which key package, we get a reminder of the actions that are associated with this target. So the set of actions that we can perform on the thing over here, on what we are currently targeting. And what we are currently targeting is the symbol at point. So Embark Act, that word over there, that those two words over there. So for example, I can hit the letter H, and this will describe the symbol at point. So you can see that we got a help buffer telling us what Embark Act is, and this is an interactive function, blah, blah, blah. And you can read the rest of the documentation string. So that's the very basic idea. Let's try this over a URL. I won't be explaining all the actions because this is something you can do on your own. I'm just hitting another action now, and I am visiting this website over here. Very simple, very effective. This is something I do quite often, by the way. I have a URL in front of me. I type Embark Act followed by W, and this saves the URL to the top of the kill ring, so I can yank from it at some later point and continue on with my work. Of course, you saw there are lots of other actions, and the idea with all those actions is that they are defined in key maps. So the way that you associate a new key with an action, or an old key with a new action, is the same you do with any key binding. If you know how to assign a key binding in Emacs, you know how to configure Embark. and we will explain a bit later all those Embark key binding maps that you can use, those key maps that you may use. But let's continue a bit more. Let's run describe function command and embark no exit, for example. I think there exists such a command. Yes, embark act no exit, that's the name of it. So this is my target now. So if I call embark act, and let's say, for example, I hit the letter I, it will insert the target directly at point and will exit the mini buffer. But as you can see with this example over here, embark act no exit. So let's do it like this. Let's add some space over here. And if I do this again, and now I call embark act no exit, I have another key binding for that. And now type insert. You can see that it inserts the thing, but it doesn't exit the context I am in this case the mini buffer, so you can continue on acting on targets as you wish. So this is something that is very useful in certain context, in a certain scenario, and one such case is, for example, when you are switching buffers. Let's say I have some buffers over here, and let's say that what I want to do is I want to kill some buffers. So let's say that I want this buffer over here to be killed. Embark act no exit, and then K, kill this buffer. Yes, kill it. And so let's proceed to another one, I buffer maybe. And now let's kill it with embark act, the regular embark act, which will then exit our context. So you get the idea. You have to experiment with this and see what makes sense for you. There are other conduits to embark, such as embark become. So you start with one action and then you switch to another. But this is something I have not been using other than for demo purposes. I always forget about it. I don't know. But it is something to bear in mind. Embark finally has a built-in help command assigned to control H, which is the standard suffix for all key chords. So to get help for all key chords. But if you have which key set up, you will get this pop-up that I showed over there. So this thing over here with the reminder of what kind of commands you can and what key is associated with them. Normally I don't use which key, but I did configure it for the purposes of this demo because I realized that my use case of just remembering all the commands would not really be conveyed to you. You would not quite understand what was going on here. So if I were to type control, comma, and then W, you would be left in the dark wondering what kind of incantation that was. Anyhow, let's proceed. So what I demonstrated thus far with regard to Embark is actions on a per item basis. So we have one link, one URL, one symbol at point, one buffer that we want to kill, and so on and so forth. So that was the set of actions that you can do on a per item basis. But of course, Embark can do more than that. It can operate on the entire set of possible targets, and this is what might add to the initial confusion people may have while trying to make sense of Embark. But I think once you make sense of this bifurcation, this distinction, everything fits in place. So let's see this in action. What I want to do here is I want to call the describe keymap command. This is not bound to a key by default, I think, but I bind it to Control H capital K. And what we want to do here, Control H capital K, and then Embark, and we use the style dispatcher. And what we want to do here is to take those candidates and store a buffer so that we can review it at a later point. So Embark has this concept called Embark occur, Don't focus too much on the names, by the way, because those are fairly new packages and there are changes being made, always being refined. They are under heavy development, active development rather. So please take this demo just as an introduction and not as a guide that is exhaustive and fully precise. So anyhow, there is this concept of the embark occur command. The idea with this is that you take the set of all possible targets and produce a buffer that holds them. So this is in effect a snapshot of what you were doing, and what you can do in this buffer over here is what you could do in all other embark targets. If I were to hit the return key over here, it will perform the default action that would have taken place under normal circumstances in that scenario. So I was doing Control H, capital K, then the return key, the red key, would simply offer help for the thing at point. So you can see that I have this over here, so I can go and check all those items. And of course, by describing each of these key maps, you can gain insight into those contexts that I alluded to earlier. So when, for example, Embark is acting on files, the relevant key map is the Embark file map. And we can see the default actions and keys bound to that map. Similarly, we have for buffers and regions, and you can see what we have over here. So you can study this on your own. Of course, these are not necessarily all the key maps, because you can always define your own. You can always specify targets, commands, and context. And this is discussed in the Embark documentation, which is, by the way, of a high standard, and you should definitely read it. But the idea with this buffer, anyhow, is that, at least for me, I don't know if other people use this functionality, is that you can do either of two things. First, you can rename it to something that makes sense for you. If you want to do that, I won't do it now, but you can rename it, and then you can write it to a file, so you may revisit it at a later point. And the idea with this is that maybe you are, for example, writing some elisp function, and you want to use some of the built-in commands, and you don't remember, for example, what is the difference between mapcar, mapcan, and mapconcat, for example. So you have the list of those three, and you bring up the buffer and you just inspect those three. Okay, I'm being simplistic here, but you get the idea. You may want to inspect all those at a later point in time. That's a more practical example. So you don't have to keep this buffer around. You can save it to a file and revisit it over the weekend, let's say. But that's the idea. Let's close that window. And the point over there is quite straightforward. Once you see it in action, you know what you can do with it. A wrapper of this Embark occur functionality is actually not a wrapper, rather a command that is similar in spirit but different in its execution, is Embark export. And this is actually what I use by default because it falls back to Embark occur. The point with Embark export is that when Embark interprets a set of targets as being associated to a completion category that can be acted upon through another major mode, then Embark will produce a buffer in that major mode. So in practice, so that I am not again too abstract, when you are writing, for example, for buffers, let's say we have this for buffers, and you call Embark export, what will happen is that you will get an iBuffer. I have talked about iBuffer, I have demonstrated it before, and this is a very powerful tool for managing your buffers, For example, let's say that I want to keep this buffer but kill all the others. So you can toggle the mark and then delete the buffers. You can see operation finished, killed 9 buffers. You can see how simple that was. I went from the mini buffer to iBuffer and performed some action, and then I can close this and get on with my work. Same principle when you are completing against the files. Let's say I have some files I want to match and they match the literal string economics, and I got a list over there. Let's do this again. Do I have something for Emacs? Okay, that was flexible matching, but you get the idea. It doesn't really matter what it is. When you are targeting files, you get dired, and you can use it as a normal dired buffer, so it doesn't really make any difference. There is no any kind of magic happening in the background. Same principle for iBuffer. And when you are matching something else, Embark export will fall back to Embark occur, and you can use Embark occur as I outlined earlier. So this specific functionality, this per set functionality of Embark rather than the per item is what allows me in particular to use Embark as my front end, if you will, for the default mini buffer, because even though I have not mentioned it yet, you have already seen it. When I am typing something, you can see that I get an Embark window popping up, and this is actually a live occur window. So it is the same that you would get with the standard Embark occur, which I said is the snapshot, but this one over here is live updating. So when you type something, it will be filtered to match your input. So you can see I have a lot of stuff going on here, which key, and you can see I have those 2 over there, and let's kill those buffers, and we are back to where we started. So Embark live occur is what visualizes the candidates for me, and this is the important thing. It visualizes, it doesn't do anything else with them. Those candidates already exist. The mini buffer is fully aware of them, and what we are doing here is just a usability enhancement. So that's all there is to it. Let's proceed, and then we have consult. Consult is your means of gaining access to more enhanced, enriched, if you want, mini buffer centric functions, and there are lots of them. And the idea is that you have basically 2 categories of commands. One, they are wrappers or enhancements to built-in functionality. For example, there exists iMenu, which is built into Emacs, and there is also consult iMenu. But there are other commands which are new, they don't exist in Emacs. For example, the ability to navigate the mark ring visually, or to go to a specific line, and you have an optional preview of the searches that you may use to go there. What I want to show you with Consult is a couple of things. Let's go, oh, sorry, I shouldn't be here, but let's find the library, and let's go to Consult first. It wasn't anything secret over there, but don't worry. So we are in the Consult source code over here, and what I want to do first is use Consult outline, and it tells me to go to a heading. By the way, I did some changes earlier, and I don't know why this live occur window is so small. I'm not sure what I did, but something with the display buffer A list. I was doing some experiments, and I always try to avoid those in the last minute, but I can't help it. This is Emacs. Anyhow, so the idea, what I did here is I run consult outline command. Let's come over here again and have a look at what we get. This is the outline, and you can, of course, narrow the outline. And when you have something, for example, def custom, we have this. Let's export this outline. So you can see over here that what we have is line numbers and the relevant matches. So you can use this as a dynamically generated index, a table of contents, if you will, so that you can navigate to this position. Let me toggle line numbers here as well. Let's see it in action. Let's go to 79. And you can see I am in 79, 194 over here, and there it is. So this is a very, you can see the synergy between Consult Outline and Embark occur in this case. So that's very helpful. Let's see what else we can do. There is Consult iMenu. And this is similar in principle with the outline, but the difference is that iMenu is more abstract in that it tries to match syntactically relevant constructs. So you can see over here, by the way, we can toggle the mark, how we view these. So you can see over here that it is matching. Let's focus this buffer. As I said, this is a regular buffer. So you can see that we have variables, and then we have functions, and so on. You can see this is a comprehensive library. There is a lot going on here. So the reason I want to show you iMenu is, of course, you can do the same thing you did with the outline. You can narrow it and then export it and have an index. But here is the other thing that Consult has. It's this concept of narrowing by a certain type, and this works for some commands. You type a key, that this is customizable. In my case, it is the greater than sign, and you can see again using which key, some other keys that you can type to narrow to that specific context. For example, I want to narrow two variables, so I hit the letter V, and you can see over here, variables has been locked in. So if I search for, I don't know, consult, let's search for narrow, for example. You can see that I have, by the way, this is my default view, the grid, for contexts that don't fall in a certain completion table, but you can always toggle the view. So you can see that I have narrowed to the variables, and then I further filtered it using completion, and of course I can export this, and let's have it like this over here. So I can go and see this again, and I can go and inspect the library at my own pace. This is extremely powerful because it makes it very easy to navigate code that you are not familiar with. So which key, consult is almost 2,500 lines, and when you visit a file like that, maybe you don't know how it is structured, so this can really help, and it is very simple yet very effective. So that's the idea with Consult. I think it is very straightforward. There is not much to talk about. It's like the standard commands, you know, but with a lot of extras, and you can see those in practice. There is, of course, it was recently introduced, and I am somewhat hesitant to demo every functionality here because things are in a state of flux for the time being. But there was a command that was recently introduced. Let me switch to my Emacs file. And because I want to check this repo that I know. So there was this asynchronously updating grep command, or the find command. And it's also for rip grep and for fd find and so on. But the idea with this, which is a very intriguing concept, is that your first input, for example, let's search for consult. This one is passed to the relevant grep command. Then you can add another filter. So we have another filter over here, and this other filter is sent to Emacs, to the completion framework. So for example, I want to search for something that includes L and let's say modus. So you can see that we have those matches now instead of what we had earlier. So we grabbed for consult and then we further filtered the list with those search terms. And of course, you can export this into a standard grep buffer, and if you have the wgrep package, you can make this buffer editable and make the changes you want, and then they will be written to the files that you have here. I have shown this many times in the past, so no need to belabor the point. You grep, you produce a buffer, you run a keyboard macro or a query replace, and you make all the changes, you save the changes, and you are good to go. You can make 1,000 changes in a matter of seconds. Super effective. So back to our presentation. That's the idea with Consult. It has a lot of commands for you to check, and there is also a wish list. So if you have the requisite expertise, please go there, take a look. You may want to implement some of those commands in the wish list, or if you are a user, you may want to provide some feedback or some more ideas to expand that list. So please do so. And finally, we have marginalia, which again, it is something that I have not talked about, but you have already seen it. You can see it in action over here. It is those, annotations that we have on the side of the completion candidates. And you can see in the case of buffers, we get the size of the buffer, the major mode it is in, and where relevant, the underlying file system path to the file it is visiting. When we have for find files, for example, you get the user permissions, the date it was last accessed, the size, and so on and so forth. And there are other contexts as well. No need to showcase everything. This is the idea with marginalia. One thing to note is that, as far as I can tell, marginalia is decorative in nature, so you cannot use those metadata as filter predicates. So for example, you cannot filter your buffers by major mode. That would have been absolutely fantastic, of course, but for the time being, we have to make do with what we have, and this is marginalia as an ancillary tool, as merely providing a secondary function of informing you of what you have in the mini buffer over there. So that's the idea with this. And this is basically what I had to say. So of course the wall of text comes last. And the idea is that, maybe you know this already, but about a year ago I switched from Ivy. I was an Ivy user. I started out with Ivy. I switched from Ivy to iComplete. Ivy, of course, is very powerful, and if you are an Ivy user, you already know everything that I have showcased here. Ivy can do all of this as well. Helm can do it as well, though I have never used Helm full time, but I know that this is not brand new functionality. This is just a set of modular tools that try to work in a more default Emacs friendly way. So this is why I like them as well. But anyhow, I switched from Ivy to iComplete about a year ago, and my motivation at the time was to better understand my system, because even though Ivy is powerful and fairly easy to set up, it is not something I could wrap my head around. So I couldn't really expand it in ways that I wanted. I was not sure what I had to do, where I had to intervene to get exactly what I wanted to do. So I switched to iComplete. I did a video about iComplete February last year, end of February, though privately I had switched to it in January of 2020. Anyhow, so the idea was that I switched to iComplete and I started from a very generic basis, and then I gradually introduced my own functions and some other packages that were available, and eventually got to a state where I thought I was being productive, and indeed iComplete served me well all those months, because it taught me a lot of things about eLisp. I learned how to make use of the built-in completing read function. I understood in practice that the underlying mechanisms of Emacs, so the default mini buffer, are actually very powerful. You don't need another completion framework when you already have one built in. What you need is something to visualize the candidates, to visualize the data that is already there. So this journey has taught me again the value of modularity, which is that you have those standalone tools that can, however, work in tandem, so they are linkable yet independent. And the idea with this is that you can piece them together into a system, and you go from the basics to the more complex emergent reality, so you can understand every step in the process from simplicity to complexity, and therefore you can construct and deconstruct this system. You can do it at will, and you can do so, maybe you want to introduce some new element of functionality or remove something, or just for educational purposes, you want to understand what is going on. And this is my primary motivation, actually. I mostly want to learn, and then of course I want to have something that works, but mostly I want to learn what is going on so that I can be in control, and when I want to extend something, I know how to do it. And this has been the case thanks to this sort of hard reset that I had to do last year when I switched from Ivy to iComplete. Of course, now I have a system that is simpler than iComplete, than what I had with iComplete, even though this may not be readily apparent. One thing I didn't mention, but it's an implementation detail, though an important one. You see that I have activated the mini buffer, but you will notice that nothing pops up. This is something that I had asked from the developer of Embark, actually, because I don't like distractions. What normally happens in my day-to-day usage is that I will type something and expand it with tab and hit the return key, and this pop-up will never show up. So this is what normally happens. I am doing something like this, so you see, so things are not jumping around. I don't really like it when the mini buffer expands for no good reason. I want to have things be done slowly and deliberately. I don't want to have motion sickness just by using Emacs. I prefer to avoid that, and I also find it very disorienting when I have a window layout like something like this, for example, and then you have also the mini buffer pop up and things are jumping around. It's really annoying. So yeah, I have this as well, but as I said, it's an implementation detail. It's just me being eccentric with my Emacs tastes. Not to continue on rambling, let's wrap this up. I want to thank and congratulate the authors of those packages. We have Omar Antolin Camarena, and if you have checked my .emacs over the last months, you have seen this name already. Omar is a developer of several packages, but for the purposes of our demo here, is the developer of Embark and Orderless. Both of them are integral to my completion framework. Then we have Daniel Mendler, who is the maintainer of Consult, and also some other packages of Daniel. I am using them, but again, they are not relevant to our demo over here. And both of them maintain the Marginalia library. Marginalia came into being by merging code that existed in Embark and consult, but that's a historical detail. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that we have those packages. They are under active development, and more features will be available in the near future. One last thing which I really appreciate is that both of them are very meticulous in what they are doing, and this shows in the fact that they take care of their documentation. They have quality docs, they have informative readmes, and they recently started producing info manuals for their projects, and this is something I appreciate because to me, when I visit the package, if the documentation is good, if I can see that there is some effort being put into it, then that is a sign for me. It is not always correct, but it is an indication that the developer really cares about this project, that this is not just something that is put together over the weekend and just pushed onto a public repo. This is something that the developer is very dedicated towards, and this is something that I value a lot, because if the docs are of a high quality, then chances are that the code will be of a similar standard. And of course, this is the case with those two packages. They are top-notch, and I am very happy to be using them in my day-to-day setup. So that's all there is to it, folks. These are some links, but I will include this, the entire text of this presentation below the video. I will post the video on my website. So if you are watching this on the video hosting platform, I will include a link to the relevant blog post, basically, and you can get this presentation from there. And of course, you can check my .emacs. There will be a link to it to see all the code I have for everything here. And please bear in mind that, as I said again, these are fairly new packages, so things are still in a state of flux. There will be more functionality coming in the foreseeable future, so please bear that in mind. That's all for now, folks. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.